Okay, let's talk about the 4 important vocabulary words for this lesson. Let's start with midline. It is exactly what it sounds like. It's the middle line of the graph. I'll kind of show you on this graph where the midline is. So if we look at our picture here, the middle of that function is right here. Okay, so our middle line of our graph, I'll just do it with a little dotted line here, would be whatever the equation of that line is. So for our example, that would be the line y = 0. Okay, next piece of information that will be probably easiest to find is what is called our amplitude. And the amplitude is how high above or how low below the highest and lowest points are below the midline. So for our example, we could pick a high point on the graph right here, and we could see how high that is above the midline. So this right here would be 1 unit. Now, because we're looking at the midline and we're looking at the middle line of the graph and we're comparing our highest and lowest to that, whether you look at your high point or your low point, it'll be the same. So for example, if you picked this low point, it's still going to be 1 below. That unit is just 1 there. So in our example, our amplitude is 1. Next up, let's talk about the period of the graph. So the period of a graph is how long it takes for our graph to complete one full cycle. This can sometimes be a little bit trickier to figure out. So what I do is I just pick a point, all right? So I'm gonna start at 0, 0, okay? Now I'm gonna trace along that, and I notice I'm heading up, okay? I'm heading up to my highest point, then I head down to my lowest point. Now some of you might think, oh, we just made it through one cycle, but I haven't actually gotten back to where I began. That's how we know when we've ended a cycle. So I'd go up here, and I'm back on that midline. So if I kind of highlight this one section of the graph here, you can kind of start to see how that would be one cycle of the graph. And I drew over top of this, but that number right there on the graph, that is 2 pi. So in our example, the period is 2 pi units long. And then finally, phase shift. Your phase shift is just your left and right shift. And this is going to be more important when we actually start graphing the functions. So in our standard graph, we can't really tell if there's any phase shift because we can't tell if this graph has been transformed and moved left or right without knowing the equation that created it. So just some knowledge for future kind of reference. We're going to talk more about the phase shift in another lesson.